Mark Thompson was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, though he never complained about it. He lived in a small, drafty apartment on the outskirts of town with his two children, Lily, who was 8, and Jake, who had just turned 5. Life wasn't easy for Mark. Ever since losing his job at the factory 6 months ago, he'd been doing everything he could to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. But no matter how hard he worked, there always seemed to be more bills than money. During the day, Mark took whatever odd jobs came his way. Some days he delivered groceries for an elderly neighbor who tipped him a few dollars. Other days he mowed lawns or cleaned gutters for people around the neighborhood. At night, after putting the kids to bed, he often sat alone in the dim light of the living room staring at piles of unpaid bills scattered across the coffee table. The stress gnawed at him, but he forced himself to stay strong for Lily and Jake. They deserved better than what life had handed them so far. Winter had arrived earlier this year, bringing with it biting winds and icy mornings. The old heater in their apartment groaned and wheezed, barely keeping the cold at bay. Mark noticed that the thin blankets they used at night weren't enough anymore. His kids would wake up shivering, their little teeth chattering as they tried to burrow deeper into the worn-out fabric. One particularly frigid evening, as Mark tucked Lily and Jake into their shared bed, he made a decision. He pulled the last decent blanket they owned, a faded wool one that had seen better days, and draped it over them. "You guys take this tonight," he said gently, brushing Lily's hair away from her forehead. "I'll be fine." Jake looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "But Daddy, won't you be cold?" Mark smiled, though his heart ached. "Don't worry about me, buddy. I'm tougher than I look." After making sure the kids were settled, Mark grabbed his coat and headed out for one last delivery shift. It was past midnight by the time he finished, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional gust of wind rattling through the trees. As he drove home, his car's heater struggling to push warmth into the frosty interior, he passed by a park where a single street lamp cast a pale glow onto the pavement below. That's when he saw her. A young woman sat huddled beneath the lamppost, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She wore only a light jacket, clearly inadequate for the freezing temperatures. Her head was bowed, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face, but Mark could see her shoulders trembling as she fought against the cold. Something about her struck a chord deep within him. Maybe it was the way she clutched her knees to her chest, or maybe it was the loneliness radiating off her like waves. Whatever it was, Mark felt an unmistakable tug at his heart. He slowed the car to a stop and rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" he called out softly, not wanting to startle her. The woman lifted her head slowly, revealing a pale face marked by exhaustion. Her lips were chapped, and her eyes held a mixture of fear and gratitude. I'm fine," she stammered, though her voice betrayed her words. "Just trying to stay warm." Mark hesitated for a moment. He glanced at the passenger seat beside him, where the old wool blanket lay folded neatly. It wasn't much, but it was all he had left. His mind raced as he weighed his options. If he gave it away, he'd have nothing to protect himself from the cold tonight. But then again, hadn't he already decided he could handle it? And besides, this woman looked like she needed it far more than he did. Without another thought, Mark reached for the blanket and stepped out of the car. The icy air hit him like a slap, but he ignored it as he approached the young woman. She watched him warily, unsure of his intentions. "Here," he said, draping the blanket over her shoulders. "Take this. You need it more than I do." For a moment, she simply stared at him, her wide eyes filled with disbelief. Then, ever so slightly, her lips curled into a faint smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Really? Thank you." Mark nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and sadness wash over him. Pride because he'd done something kind, even when he had so little to give. Sadness because he knew exactly how it felt to be desperate, to feel like the world had turned its back on you. He lingered for a moment longer, unsure if he should say anything else, but ultimately decided against it. Instead, he gave her a small wave and returned to his car. As he drove home, Mark couldn't shake the image of the young woman from his mind. Who was she? Why was she out here all alone in the middle of the night? He wanted to believe that his gesture had made a difference, however small. Still, he couldn't help but wonder if it was enough, or if she'd find herself in the same situation tomorrow night. When he finally got back to the apartment, he tiptoed inside, careful not to wake the kids. The chilly air greeted him immediately, seeping through the cracks in the walls and windows. Mark sighed as he slipped under the thin sheet on his mattress, bracing himself for another sleepless night. Despite the discomfort, though, he found himself smiling faintly. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for himself but for the stranger he'd met under the street lamp. Sometimes even the smallest acts of kindness could spark something bigger. And maybe, just maybe, tonight had been the beginning of something extraordinary. The next morning, Mark woke up with a stiffness in his bones that no amount of stretching could ease. The cold had seeped into every corner of the apartment overnight, and his thin sheet offered little protection. Still, he forced himself out of bed, knowing the kids would be waking soon. Lily and Jake were early risers, their energy boundless even on the coldest mornings. He shuffled to the kitchen, where he brewed a pot of cheap coffee and prepared oatmeal for breakfast. Simple, filling and affordable. As he stirred the pot, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. Curious but wary, Mark wiped his hands on a dish towel and picked it up. The message was short but startling. "Hi, Mark. This is Emily, the girl from last night. Thank you for your kindness. I'd like to repay you somehow. Can we meet?" Mark stared at the text, his heart skipping a beat. How did she know his name? Had he mentioned it when they spoke briefly under the street lamp? He couldn't remember. But more importantly, why? Did she want to meet him? His mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, was she in trouble and needed help? He hesitated before replying. "Who is this?" he typed cautiously. Her response came quickly. "I'm the woman you gave the blanket to last night. Please don't worry. I just want to thank you." Properly, Mark frowned, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to ignore the message and move on with his day. After all, he didn't have time for distractions, not with 2 kids depending on him and bills piling up. But another part of him felt curious. Something about her tone seemed genuine, almost desperate. Against his better judgment, he agreed to meet her later that afternoon at a small cafe near the park. When the time came, Mark arrived a few minutes early, clutching a cup of coffee to warm his hands. He scanned the room, searching for someone who matched the image of the young woman from the previous night. At first, he didn't see anyone familiar. Then, a figure caught his eye, a woman sitting alone by the window, sipping tea. Her hair was neatly combed now, and she wore a stylish coat that looked far too expensive for someone who had been shivering on the streets less than 24 hours ago. Mark approached her cautiously. "Emily?" She turned to face him, her expression lighting up with recognition. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for coming." He slid into the chair opposite her, feeling awkward and out of place. Up close, she looked younger than he'd expected, maybe mid-20s, with sharp features softened by a warm smile. There was something regal about her posture, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. It didn't match the image of the fragile stranger he'd encountered the night before. "So," Mark began, breaking the silence, "how did you know my name?" Emily hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "I saw it on your delivery uniform last night. When you stopped to talk to me, I noticed the name tag." Mark nodded slowly, though he still wasn't entirely convinced. "Okay. And why did you want to meet me?" Her gaze dropped to the table, and for a moment, she seemed lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Because what you did last night, it meant more to me than you can imagine." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't used to being thanked like this, especially not by someone who appeared to come from a completely different world. "It was just a blanket," he muttered, brushing off the compliment. "Anyone would have done the same." Emily shook her head firmly. "No, they wouldn't. You gave away the only thing keeping you warm, even though you clearly needed it. Yourself. Do you know how rare that is? Most people wouldn't think twice about driving past someone like me. Mark shrugged, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't given it much thought at the time, he'd simply acted on instinct. Now hearing her put it into words made him feel strangely exposed, as if she'd uncovered a piece of him he hadn't realized was there. I'm glad it helped, he said eventually, trying to steer the conversation away from himself. But you seem different today. Better. Emily smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness behind her eyes. I am. Last night was difficult, but let's just say I've been in situations where I needed reminders of humanity. Your kindness reminded me of that. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. There was something she wasn't saying, something lurking beneath the surface of her polished exterior. What exactly were you doing out there? He asked bluntly. If you don't mind me asking. Emily hesitated again, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. It's complicated, she admitted, but I'll tell you this, I'm not who you think I am. Mark raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. Meaning? She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever reaction might follow. My family owns several properties in this city, including the building where you live. Mark froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The expensive coat, the refined demeanor, the air of authority she carried so effortlessly. She wasn't just some random person struggling to survive the winter. She was someone with power, privilege, and resources far beyond anything he could fathom. For a moment, panic gripped him. What did she want from him? Was she planning to raise the rent? Kick him and his kids out onto the streets? His mind spiraled with worst-case scenarios until Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. Please don't worry, she said quickly, sensing his unease. I'm not here to cause trouble, in fact, quite the opposite. Mark blinked, unsure of what to believe. Then why are you telling me this? Emily sighed, leaning forward slightly. Because I need you to understand something. Last night, when you gave me that blanket, you didn't just save me from the cold. You reminded me of what really matters. Compassion, humanity, connection. Those are things my family has forgotten, but you reminded me. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Mark didn't know what to say. He'd never imagined that a simple act of kindness could carry such significance, especially to someone like her. Before he could respond, Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a checkbook. She tore off a slip of paper and slid it across the table toward him. What's this? Mark asked, staring at the check blankly. It's for you, Emily replied firmly. Consider it rent forgiveness, for life. Mark's jaw dropped as he read the amount written in neat, precise handwriting. $50,000. His stomach churned with disbelief. No, he said immediately, pushing the check back toward her. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Emily insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. You helped me when I needed it most. Let me return the favor. But, Mark stammered, his mind racing. That's too much. I didn't do anything special. You did more than you realize, Emily countered. Take it, Mark. Use it to build a better life for your kids. That's all I ask. Mark sat there in stunned silence, torn between gratitude and guilt. On one hand, the money would change everything. It could pay off his debts, buy new clothes for the kids, maybe even give them a chance at stability they hadn't known in years. On the other hand, accepting it felt wrong, like taking advantage of someone else's generosity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded reluctantly. Thank you, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Emily said with a reassuring smile. Just promise me one thing. What's that? That you'll keep being the incredible person you are. Because the world needs more people like you. Mark looked down at the check in his hand, then back at Emily. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to turn around. The days that followed Mark's meeting with Emily felt surreal, like stepping into a dream he was afraid would shatter at any moment. He carried the check around in his wallet for nearly a week before finally depositing it at the bank. Every time he thought about the money, $50,000 sitting in his account, it seemed too good to be true. But there it was, real and tangible, a lifeline thrown to him when he least expected it. With the weight of debt lifted off his shoulders, Mark began making plans. First, he paid off all their outstanding bills: rent, utilities, medical expenses. The list went on longer than he cared to admit. Then he bought new blankets, jackets, and shoes for Lily and Jake. The kids squealed with delight when they saw the cozy winter gear, hugging Mark tightly as if they could feel the relief washing over him. For once, he didn't have to worry about cutting corners or stretching every dollar until it snapped. There was breathing room now, space to think beyond survival, but Mark wasn't one to sit idle. He knew better than anyone how quickly fortunes could change, so he decided to use this opportunity wisely. One evening, while tucking the kids into bed, he asked them what they wanted most. Lily hesitated, then whispered shyly, "I want Daddy to stop being so tired all the time." Jake chimed in, "Yeah, and I want you to teach me how to fix stuff." Their words stuck with him. Fixing things had always been a hobby of his, something he enjoyed tinkering with during rare moments of free time. It occurred to him that maybe he could turn that passion into a career. After some research, he enrolled in a local trade school to study carpentry. The program wasn't cheap, but thanks to Emily's generosity, he could afford tuition without hesitation. For the first time in years, Mark allowed himself to dream about a future where he wasn't just scraping by but building something meaningful. Meanwhile, Emily became a regular presence in Mark's life and in the lives of his children. She visited often, bringing toys, books, and puzzles for Lily and Jake. They adored her, calling her Miss Emily and begging her to stay longer whenever she stopped by. To them, she was a magical figure who brought laughter and joy into their small apartment. To Mark, she was something else entirely, a reminder of how interconnected people could be, even when they came from vastly different worlds. During one of her visits, Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping Jake assemble a wooden puzzle shaped like a dinosaur. Mark watched from the doorway, marveling at how natural she looked surrounded by his chaotic little family. When Jake finally snapped the last piece into place, he threw his arms around Emily's neck. "You're the best helper ever," he declared. Emily laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "Well, your dad is pretty great at fixing things too, did you know that?" Jake turned to look at Mark, his eyes wide with awe. "Really? Like superpowers?" Mark chuckled, crouching down beside them. "Not exactly superpowers, buddy, but yeah, I'm learning how to build and repair stuff. Maybe someday I'll teach you." "I'd like that," Jake said earnestly. As the kids played, Emily pulled Mark aside. "How are things going?" she asked, her tone warm but serious. "Good," he replied, still amazed by how much had changed in such a short time. "Better than good, actually. I started classes last week. It's challenging, but I think I'm going to enjoy it." Emily smiled, clearly pleased. "That's wonderful. You deserve this, Mark, really." He shook his head, feeling a familiar twinge of guilt. "I couldn't have done it without you. I hope you know how grateful I am." "You don't owe me anything," Emily said firmly. "But if you really want to repay me, keep doing what you're doing. Keep being kind, keep working hard, and keep inspiring others. That's all I care about." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left that day. Inspiring others? He wasn't sure he was cut out for that. Sure, he tried to set a good example for his kids, but inspiring strangers? That sounded like something heroes did, not ordinary guys like him. Yet, as the weeks passed, Mark noticed subtle changes in Emily too. She began visiting less frequently, though she always called to check in. When they did see each other, she seemed more energized, almost radiant. One afternoon, she invited him to join her at a community center she'd recently started volunteering at. "It's nothing fancy," she explained over the phone, "but we're trying to make a difference. I think you'd like it." Curious, Mark agreed to tag along. What he found surprised him. The center was housed in a modest building on the edge of town, but inside, it buzzed with activity. Volunteers served hot meals to families in need, while others led workshops on everything from resume writing to basic home repairs. In one corner, kids played games under the watchful eye of teenage mentors. In another, adults learned computer skills to help them land better jobs. "This is amazing," Mark said, turning to Emily. "Did you organize all this?" She nodded modestly. "My family owns the property. I convinced them to let me convert it into a resource hub for the community. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Mark felt a swell of admiration for her. Here she was, using her privilege not to distance herself from the struggles of others, but to bridge the gap between them. It was humbling and inspiring. Inspired by what he saw, Mark offered to volunteer alongside her. At first, he helped with minor tasks, setting up chairs, serving food, and cleaning up afterward. But soon, he found himself leading small workshops on woodworking basics, sharing tips and tricks he'd picked up in class. The participants ranged from teenagers eager to learn a new skill to older adults looking for ways to supplement their income. Watching their faces light up as they completed their first project filled Mark with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, Emily approached him with a gleam in her eye. "You're a natural at this," she said, handing him a cup of coffee. "Have you thought about teaching full-time once you finish school?" Mark blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. "Teaching? Me? I don't know." "Why not?" Emily pressed. "You have a gift for explaining things clearly and people trust you. Plus, you understand what it's like to struggle. That makes you relatable in a way most instructors aren't." Her confidence in him was both flattering and daunting. Could he really step into a role like that? The idea felt overwhelming but also exciting. For the first time, he allowed himself to entertain the possibility. As they stood there talking, surrounded by the hum of activity in the center, Mark realized something profound. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about paying forward, the kindness that had changed his life. Whether through teaching, volunteering, or simply being there for someone in need, he could make a difference. One small act at a time. And maybe, just maybe, those acts would ripple outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Months passed, and Mark's life began to transform in ways he had never anticipated. The carpentry program was challenging, but it reignited a passion within him that he hadn't felt since his teenage years. Each day after class, he returned, home with sawdust clinging to his clothes and a sense of accomplishment glowing in his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. And as he grew more confident in his skills, he found himself drawn deeper into the community center where Emily had introduced him. The center became a second home for Mark. At first, he'd only planned to volunteer occasionally, lending a hand wherever it was needed. But as word spread about his woodworking workshops, demand skyrocketed. People from all walks of life came to learn, some hoping to pick up a new hobby, others seeking practical skills to improve their circumstances. Mark loved every moment of it. Teaching gave him purpose, and seeing the pride on someone's face when they completed their first project reminded him of how far he'd come. Emily continued to play a pivotal role in his journey. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes, securing funding and resources for the center while also fostering connections with local businesses. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as Mark finished helping a group of teenagers assemble birdhouses, Emily approached him with an excited gleam in her eye. "Guess what?" she said, barely containing her enthusiasm. "We just got approval to expand the center. We're adding a full workshop space specifically for carpentry classes." Mark's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? That's incredible." "I know," Emily replied, beaming. "And I already have the perfect person in mind to lead it. You." "Me?" Mark stammered. taken aback. I'm still learning myself. Are you sure? Absolutely, Emily said without hesitation. You've proven yourself over and over again. You inspire people, Mark. They trust you because you understand their struggles. Besides, we can hire assistants to support you until you feel ready to take the reins completely. Mark hesitated, overwhelmed by the responsibility, but also thrilled at the opportunity. He thought about Lily and Jake, who often tagged along, to watch him teach. They'd beam with pride whenever someone praised their dad's work. Could he really turn this into a career? A stable, fulfilling one that allowed him to provide for his family while making a difference in the lives of others? With Emily's encouragement, he accepted the offer. Over the next few weeks, the center underwent renovations, transforming part of the building into a state-of-the-art workshop equipped with tools and materials donated by local companies. When it finally opened, Mark stood at the front of the room addressing a packed class of eager students. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone, but his voice rang clear and steady. Welcome, everyone, he began, scanning the room. If you're here, it means you want to create something meaningful, not just with wood, but with your own potential. Let's get started. As the weeks turned into months, Mark flourished in his new role. He taught not only technical skills, but also resilience, patience, and creativity. Many of his students went on to use their newfound abilities to start small businesses or repair items around their homes. Others simply enjoyed the camaraderie and satisfaction of working with their hands. No matter their goals, Mark made sure they left each session feeling empowered. Meanwhile, Emily's influence extended beyond the center. Inspired by Mark's selflessness, she launched a series of initiatives aimed at addressing systemic issues in the community. She partnered with local schools to provide scholarships for underprivileged youth, collaborated with businesses to create job training programs, and even lobbied city officials to invest in affordable housing projects. Her family's wealth became a tool for change rather than a symbol of privilege, and she credited Mark with sparking her renewed sense of purpose. You reminded me of what truly matters, she told him one evening as they sat together outside the center, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. When you gave me that blanket, you showed me that kindness doesn't require grand gestures. It's about seeing someone else's humanity and acting on it. Mark shook his head, humbled by her words. I didn't do anything special. You're the one changing lives now. Emily smiled softly. Maybe, but none of this would have happened without you. You lit a fire in me, Mark. And now I want to keep that flame burning for both of us. Their partnership blossomed into something neither of them had expected, a friendship rooted in mutual respect and shared values. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they complemented each other perfectly. Emily brought vision and resources, while Mark grounded her ideas with authenticity and empathy. Together, they formed a dynamic duo committed to uplifting those around them. One chilly December morning, Mark received an invitation from Emily. It was a formal letter printed on heavy cardstock, inviting him to attend the grand opening of her latest project, a sprawling community center designed to serve low-income families. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. This wouldn't exist without you. Thank you for believing in me and in us. Mark read the note several times, his heart swelling with gratitude. He realized then that their paths crossing that cold winter night hadn't been mere coincidence. It had been the beginning of something extraordinary, a ripple effect of kindness that continued to grow stronger with each passing day. On the morning of the event, Mark dressed carefully, choosing a crisp shirt and tie for the occasion. Lily and Jake bounced excitedly beside him as they walked toward the center, their breaths forming little clouds in the frosty air. When they arrived, they were greeted by a bustling crowd of volunteers, donors, and community members. Balloons swayed gently in the breeze and cheerful music filled the air. Inside, the center was a marvel of design and functionality. There were classrooms for adult education, play areas for children, a fully stocked food pantry, and even a medical clinic offering free services. Mark wandered through the halls, marveling at how much had been accomplished in such a short time. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of Emily's dedication and his own. Finally, He found her standing near the entrance, greeting guests with a radiant smile. When she spotted him, her face lit up even more. "There you are," she exclaimed, pulling him into a warm hug. "Thank you for coming." "Like I'd miss this," Mark replied, grinning. "It's incredible, Emily. You've done so much." "We've done so much," she corrected him firmly. "None of this would have been possible without your example." Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the sky to celebrate the occasion, Mark stood beside Emily, gazing out at the crowd. Families laughed and chatted, children played tag in the grass, and volunteers handed out hot chocolate to anyone who wanted it. The scene was alive with joy and hope, a stark contrast to the despair that had once gripped so many lives. "You've changed so many lives," Mark said softly, turning to Emily. "Including mine." Emily's eyes glistened with tears as she smiled back. "And you changed mine first. That blanket wasn't just warmth, it was hope. You reminded me of what really matters." In that moment, Mark understood the true power of kindness. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping transformations. It was about connection, about seeing someone else's humanity and choosing to act. And as he glanced down at the worn wool blanket draped over his arm, the same one he'd given Emily months ago, he knew its story was far from over. It was a symbol of everything they'd built together, proof that even the smallest acts of compassion could spark something extraordinary. The grand opening of the community center marked a turning point, not just for Mark and Emily, but for the entire neighborhood. What had once been an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town was now a vibrant hub of activity, buzzing with life and laughter. Families poured in daily, taking advantage of the resources available to them. Children played in the colorful recreation area, their giggles echoing through the halls. Adults attended workshops on everything from financial literacy to cooking healthy meals. The medical clinic saw a steady stream of patients, many of whom hadn't seen a doctor in years. And at the heart of it all stood Mark, leading his carpentry classes with the same warmth and patience that had first drawn people to him. For Mark, this new chapter felt like redemption. He often thought back to those dark months when he'd been drowning in debt and despair, wondering if things would ever get better. Now, as he watched his students build bookshelves, birdhouses, and picture frames, he realized how far he'd come. Each completed project was a testament to resilience, a reminder that even broken pieces could be pieced together into something beautiful. Emily, too, found fulfillment in the work they were doing. Though her relationship with her parents remained strained, she no longer cared about their disapproval. Their obsession with wealth and status seemed trivial compared to the impact she was making here. Every time she walked through the center's doors, she felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. It wasn't just the gratitude of the families they served or the camaraderie among volunteers. It was knowing that she was part of something bigger than herself. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the center, Mark and Emily sat together on a bench outside, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. Mark held the old wool blanket loosely around his shoulders, the same one he'd given Emily that fateful night, and let out a contented sigh. "You know," he said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "I keep thinking about how different my life was back then. I was so focused on surviving that I forgot what it felt like to live." Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on the golden hues painting the sky. "I think we both needed that reminder. You helped me see beyond my own bubble, and I guess I helped you find your footing again." Mark chuckled softly. "Yeah, you did more than that. You gave me a second chance." They sat there for a while longer, enjoying the quiet companionship. Despite their differences, they shared an unspoken understanding, a bond forged through kindness, trust, and mutual respect. Neither of them had expected their paths to cross the way they did, but now neither could imagine their lives without the other. As winter settled in, the center became a sanctuary for those struggling to stay warm. Donated coats and blankets lined the walls, ready to be distributed to anyone in need. Hot meals were served every evening, drawing crowds of grateful neighbors. One chilly afternoon, As Mark helped unload boxes of canned goods from a delivery truck, he noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but as the person stepped closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was the young woman from that freezing night, the one who had sparked this entire journey. "Hi, Mark," she said shyly, clutching a small bundle in her arms. "Do you remember me?" Mark stared at her, stunned. She looked healthier now, her cheeks rosy and her hair neatly combed. Gone was the fragile stranger shivering under the street lamp. In her place stood someone confident and radiant. "Of course I remember you," he replied, smiling warmly. "How have you been?" She hesitated, glancing down at the bundle in her arms. "Better. Thanks to you, and Emily." Mark noticed then that the bundle was moving slightly. His eyes widened in realization. "Is that?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "This is my son. He's 6 months old now. If it weren't for that blanket, and for meeting Emily, I don't know where we'd be." Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. He reached out instinctively, brushing a finger against the baby's tiny hand. "He's beautiful," he murmured. "What's his name?" "Eli," she said softly. "Short for Elijah. It means, 'My God is Yahweh.' I named him that because, well, I believe we were meant to meet that night like it was fate." Requiem didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. Fate? Maybe. Or maybe it was just the power of human connection, a single act of kindness setting off a chain reaction that changed countless lives. Word spread quickly about Eli's visit, and soon the story became legend within the community. People marveled at how one blanket had brought so many people together, creating a network of support and compassion. Mark couldn't help but laugh whenever someone mentioned it, though secretly, he cherished the idea. That worn-out piece of fabric had traveled full circle, symbolizing not just survival but hope, resilience, and renewal. By spring, the center had become a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Families who had once struggled to make ends meet now thrived, thanks to the opportunities provided there. Some former students of Mark's carpentry classes returned to volunteer, eager to give back. Others started businesses, using the skills they'd learned to create sustainable livelihoods. The ripple effect was undeniable, reaching farther than anyone had imagined. One sunny Saturday morning, Mark gathered Lily and Jake in the backyard of their newly renovated apartment. They'd moved into a larger unit just a few blocks away, courtesy of Emily's family, who had insisted on keeping their rent affordable. The kids squealed with delight as they chased each other around the garden, their laughter filling the air. "Dad!" Jake called out, running toward him with a handful of dandelions. "Look what I found." Mark ruffled his son's hair, grinning. "Those are perfect, buddy. Let's put them in a vase for Mommy, huh?" Jake frowned. "But Mommy isn't here." Mark's smile faltered for a moment. Jake was too young to remember his mother, who had passed away shortly after his birth. But Mark made sure to keep her memory alive, telling stories about her kindness and strength. "She's always with us, kiddo," he said gently. "In our hearts." Later that evening, as the kids drifted off to sleep, Mark sat alone on the porch staring up at the stars. He thought about everything that had happened over the past year, the struggles, the triumphs, the unexpected friendships. Life hadn't turned out the way he'd planned, but somehow it had become richer, fuller. His phone buzzed beside him, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Emily. "Thinking about you tonight. Hope you're proud of everything you've built." Mark smiled, typing a quick reply. "Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for believing in me." As he set the phone down, he glanced at the old wool blanket draped over the railing. It was frayed and faded now, its colors dulled by time and use. Yet it remained a powerful symbol, a reminder that even the smallest gestures could change the world. And so, Mark vowed to continue paying it forward, whether through teaching, volunteering, or simply being there for someone in need. He would honor the legacy of that blanket. Because deep down, he knew the true magic wasn't in the object itself. It was in the connections it inspired, the lives it touched, and the hope it carried forward. Life wasn't perfect, and challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time, in a long time, Mark felt ready to face whatever came his way. After all, he wasn't alone anymore. He had a family, a purpose, and a community that believed in him, and that, he realized, was worth more than any amount of money or possessions. As the stars twinkled above, Mark leaned back in his chair, feeling a profound sense of peace. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. Kindness had the power to transform lives, including his own.